We just pray that you would fill this place with your spirit and power. 然后主耶稣，我们为这个场地祷告，求你充满这个场地，跟你的圣灵充满它。And Lord, just pray for just your guidance, that you'd open our hearts, give us wisdom and discernment, that we'd have ears to hear and eyes to see your glory, ears to hear your word, and a heart to understand. 然后主啊，我们为自己祷告，求你打开我们的心，给我们给每一位的弟兄姐妹一颗明白的心，眼睛能看到你的荣耀，还有耳朵能听你的话。感谢你 ，Just Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we love you. 然后圣父、圣子、圣灵，我们爱你。我奉耶稣基督的名求 ，Amen. We're in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 4 through 10. 今天晚上我们在帖撒罗尼迦信书第3章4到10节。And tonight's title is Changing Our Perspective Concerning Faith. Changing Our Perspective Concerning Faith. 今天晚上的主题是改变我们对信仰的看法。改变我们对信仰的看法。And so this is important because a lot of people, when it comes to sharing the gospel, when it comes to just the Christian life, a lot of people have, when they are going to either become a Christian or they've just become a Christian, have expectations. 很多人他们对基督教，或者他们在考虑成为基督徒，或者别人在给他们传福音，或者他们刚刚开始信靠耶稣的时候，他们有很多自己的我们可以说要求。And so this is helping us to understand that sometimes the Bible shows us and teaches us things that we thought would be different when we either became a Christian or we thought that the Christian life would be easier than what it is, and only to find out that that's actually sometimes not what the Bible teaches. 然后呢，我们也有时候会发现的，或者遇到我们在圣经里面遇到经文，或者 like 一章，或者我们学很多新的神学，然后我们觉得，嘿，就是我对基督徒的了解有点不一样的。And so this is to help us tonight. We're going to look at just changing our perspective concerning faith. That is, we could understand this way as in trying to have a godly perspective of what the Christian life is. 然后我们今天晚上的具体是改变我们对信仰的看法，或者就是改好我们对基督徒的要求应该是怎么样的。1 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 1, 帖撒罗尼迦信书第3章4节 says, For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and ye knew. 我们在你们那里的时候，预先告诉你们，我们必受患难，以后果然应验了你们的知道。For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. 我既不能载人，就打发人去。要晓得你们的信心如何，恐怕那诱惑人的道理诱惑了你们，叫我们的劳苦归于徒然。Could you call? 谢谢。Verse 6, 第6节。But now when Timotheus came from you unto us and brought us good tidings of your faith and charity, and that we have good remembrance of you always, desiring greatly to see us as we also to you. 但提摩太刚才从你们那里回来，将你们信心和爱心的好消息报给我们，又说你们常常纪念我们，切切的想见我们，如同我们的圣经你们一样。 Therefore, brethren, we were comforted over you in all our affliction and distress by your faith. 所以弟兄们，我们在一切困苦患难之中，因着你们的信心就得了安慰。For now we live, if ye stand fast in the Lord. 你们若靠主站立得稳，我们就活了。For what thanks can we render to God again for you, for all the joy wherewith we joy for your sakes before God? 我们在神面前，因着我们神是喜乐，为这一切喜乐，可用何等的感谢，为你们祷告神呢 ？Night and day, praying exceedingly that we might see your face and might perfect that which is lacking in your faith. 我们昼夜切切的祈求，要见你们的面，不满你们的信心的不足。5 areas of testing that will change your faith. 5个试验领域将改变你的信仰。So this is as Christians, I don't know if you guys, I guess those who became Christians later on in life versus someone like myself who has, that might just cut off. I don't know. Okay, good. I was trying to turn on the volume. No, it's not turned on. Because the thing is that I had to stretch it over here and I can't fit the cord in without taking my case off. So it's too much of an issue. So we'll just figure it out later. I'll have to figure something else out. Anyways, so I don't know if you guys, some of you guys I know have became Christians later on in life versus a few of us who have actually been raised in church. 然后我知道有一些人他们在教会长大了，但是有一些的我们的弟兄姐妹们，我知道你们是成为like 20年后20岁后就开始信靠耶稣。And so if that is you, 如果这是你 that is you became a Christian later on in life, 就是你长大以后就成为基督徒。I don't know who led you to Christ. I don't know if you were brought by someone, if someone brought you to church, or if someone was outside and shared the gospel with you, or however that was. But when the person who first shared the gospel with you, did they or did they not give you some kind of an idea or expectations of what maybe God could give to you or God could do for you if you became a Christian? 所以特别是如果你成为 like 成人以后，就别人我不知道有人带你去教会，还是你在外面，他们给你传福音，或者他们怎么帮你开始信靠耶稣。但是如果他们在外面给你传福音，我想问你一个问题：他们开始给你传福音的时候，他们告诉你基督徒以后的生活是怎么样的？或者他们也告诉你，或者没有告诉你，上帝能帮助你，上帝能改变你的生活吗？或者他们也说了 like 上帝，如果你成为基督徒，上帝可以祝福你，或者他可以帮助你的工作，或者帮助你的生活，或者帮助你的结婚，什么什么什么的。And so I don't know, for some people, I know that when it comes to sharing the gospel, some Christians will say, and I know I realize that they do it in good intention, but they'll say things like, well, if you become a Christian, God could greatly bless your work, or God could help to heal your marriage, or God could, help you with your finances. I know sometimes people use these things when sharing the gospel. And so there are people, when they become a Christian, that they have expectations that sometimes don't align with what Scripture says. 所以一些的基督徒，他们开始信靠耶稣的时候，他们可能对基督徒或者对耶稣或者对上帝有自己的要求或者自己的想要的地方，是因为在外面有人在传福音的时候告诉他们：嘿，如果你现在成为基督徒，上帝可以祝福你的工作，或者可以祝福你的生活什么什么的。然后呢，有一些基督徒他们会考虑这个问题，然后他们觉得，嘿，我想成为基督徒，因为上帝可以给我1、2、3、4、5、6什么什么的。And so some people, before they become a Christian, they will be offered almost like saying to them, hey, if you become a Christian now, think about this. God could bless your work. God could fix your marriage. Maybe God will help you with doing this or that, or God will help you with your finances. And they use that as almost like a leverage to pull them into Christianity. And so there are people who come into Christianity and they have almost these requirements towards God, saying, God, I'll become a Christian if this, and this happens. And that's why the last 2 years when we've done Christmas parties, no, actually the 3 years that we've done Christmas parties, we have done these prayer requests where we have people write down their prayer requests on a piece of paper, right? And when we do this every single time, there are people that when we do this, they will write things like, well, I want God to give me this or that. And it's always something, usually for the most part, not all of them, but most of them are things like, well, I want God to give me this or that. And some of them will understand that, hey, if I become a Christian, God could give me this or that. And so this is, a lot of people have this idea of, if I want to become a child of God, or if I do choose Christ, what is God going to give me in return? And so if this is you tonight, or if this is something that people have brought to you, and maybe you're not even a Christian yet, and you're thinking about it, and this is something that people have put forward to you, I just want to warn you and say that when you become a Christian, your life actually could get more difficult and not necessarily easier. And so, and I would say most Christians that have been Christians for a long time, they will all testify of what I just said. And they'll give examples in their life. 然后你知道吗？如果就是你现在考虑成为基督徒，或者你刚刚成为基督徒，或者别人领导你成为基督徒的时候，他们说上帝可以帮助你改变你生活什么什么的。如果就是你，我想告诉你，你知道吗？如果你选择耶稣，你成为基督徒以后，你的生活可以成为更困难，你可能遇到更多的问题，你也可能遇到更多的困难。Why is this? 为什么 Why would a Christian's life become more difficult? 那为什么基督徒的生活要成为更困难呢？As a Christian, if you are in America, the biggest church in America is run by a pastor named Joel Osteen. 在美国的最大的教会的牧师，他名叫 Joel Osteen。然后呢，这个牧师，他们每次在开始聚会之后，他们会说一句话。In this church, every time they are getting ready to start their gatherings, their sermons, or their service, I should say, they have a saying, and one of the ideas that is taught in that church, and there's even been a book written on it. There might have been multiple books dealing with the similar topic, and the idea that statement is that as Christians, you can have your best life now. 然后呢，他们有一句话，那一位牧师他也写几本书，然后呢，他们也有一样的想法，他们想法是你现在可以得到你最好的生活。And so as a Christian, as a pastor, as a church, I want us to understand that if you are already a Christian, or if you're thinking about becoming a Christian, or if you want to share the gospel with someone outside, 如果你现在是基督徒，或者如果你在考虑成为基督徒，或者你想在外面传福音的时候， I want all of us to understand something. 我想我们都了解一个问题， that your life might become more difficult, and when you become a Christian, and that is okay, because it all has its reasons and its purpose. And actually, it is for you to have a better life, just not here, in the second life, in heaven. 所以我想你们知道，你们都明白，你在这里的生活可能是更困难的。但是你知道吗？就是没有问题，因为上帝是对你这样的，对你生活是这样子，是为了什么？是为了你到天堂可以有更好的生活。 Let me ask you a question. 我问你一个问题。What is the most important part of your Christian life? 我想问你一个问题。你的基督徒生活最重要的部分是什么？ Think about that. Think about that. So let me just actually why don't you guys right now, everyone that's here, maybe put it on your phone, or if there's a piece of paper, like you can find some in these drawers here or there, just write down real quick. Think about this. Write down what is your most important, or the most important part of your Christian life. Just write down one thing. Or maybe you don't even write down, you say, Pastor, I know in my head what I'm going to say. Okay, just think about that. Because afterwards, I want to... No, actually, write it down. I don't want you to put it in your head, because here's the thing. I don't want you to change it after this sermon's over. Okay? So think about this, guys. Just type it on your phone or write it down. And because I want to hear what you guys have to share afterwards. And you're not allowed to change it. If you put it on your phone, you can't change it, okay? I won't know, but God will. Okay? And we'll classify that as, if you change it, it's sin. Okay, so because I want us to share. Because I don't want you to be like, well, the sermon told me this, and I put down that, so I got to change it, I don't want that. 所以我想你们现在你的手机上打出来，或者你可以拿一张纸写出来这个问题。我想你现在在你手机上，还是你拿一纸写出来这个问题的答案，就是你基督徒的生活最重要的部分是什么？现在你可以写出来，因为以后我想听你们写什么，你们打出来什么？因为我不想你以后就改变你说牧师我不是要写出来，因为我不知道是这个是什么答案，但是我掌握到以后，你可能改变这个答案，因为我不知道，所以我现在呢想要你写出来这个问题，好吗？So think about this. Let me throw a couple questions out there. 我想告诉你几个答案，或者还有几个另外一个问题，但是就是关于这个问题。So I'm gonna put forth a few more questions. They're all dealing with this. There's one question. So think about this. What is the most important part of your Christian life? 所以你对你基督徒生活是最重要的点是什么？部分是什么？ Is it your relationships? 是你的关系吗？Is it your relationships with other brothers and sisters? 是你对别的弟兄姐妹们的关系吗？ Maybe you might say, well, that is extremely important, and that is. But I'm just asking you, what right now is your most important part? 然后你现在你最重要的部分是什么？ Is your relationship with God? Is it because you just really enjoy being in church? 或者你想是对上帝的最重要的是你的关系是你对上帝的关系是最重要的吗？或者你也可能说我每周去聚会，我特别的喜欢，那就是你最重要吗？ And so what is right now the most important thing in your Christian life? Because if I ask you this right now, what do you think that Paul, if you were ask Paul the apostle right now, what is your most important part in your Christian life? 然后如果你现在问保罗这个问题，你觉得他会说什么？保罗，你现在在你基督徒生活，你最重要的部分是什么？他会说什么？ And this is, and afterwards I'm going to share. And you might say, well, it has to be relationships because we're commanded to love. 那你也可能说是肯定是关于关系，上帝或者弟兄姐妹们，因为我们第一个诫命是要爱神，对吧？所以肯定是最重要的，对吧？ But let's just write it down. Let's see. 就是你写出来，我们以后就看看分享。Let me ask another question. What are your thoughts on temptations? 那你现在对诱惑有什么关系？有什么想法？ So, do temptations in a Christian's life have a purpose? Or is it just because, Satan's throwing temptations in your path and they have no other purpose other than to cause you to trip and fall? 或者在基督徒生活，你的诱惑有什么意思？有没有意思？或者你可能说，就是所有的诱惑是从撒旦来的，没有别的意思而已。还是 temptations 诱惑对你生活有没有好处？ Do temptations in the Christian life, is there anything good that can come from temptations? Think about that. How about afflictions? 或者痛苦呢? Do afflictions have a purpose? And so just these few questions that I've raised, the thing is that all Christians, I mean, if you're a Christian if you're a Christian at least for a year or longer, you will run into these three within the first year. I would assume 99% of Christians within the first year, they will run into some type of temptation, some type of affliction, and some type of relationship issues with other Christians. And this is very, very, very normal. So think about this. What kind of a role do they play in your life, other than the fact that it could tempt you or not tempt you to sin? 所以你现在想一想，如果你是基督徒，已经超过了1年，你肯定99%的基督徒会遇到痛苦、诱惑、关系的问题，所以你开始考虑这个问题。So 5 areas of testing that will change your faith. 所以5个试验领域将改变你的信仰。Here's another question. 有另外一个问题。Is testing in your life good or bad? 在你生活是试验是好还是不好？ And so we're going to look at 5 areas tonight, and some of these might be areas that you've never thought about. That could be a test in your life. 然后我今天晚上我们要看5个实验，你也可能没有上过这5个实验。Number 1, increasing your knowledge. What type of an issue does an increased knowledge influence or impose upon your faith? 所以你增长知识，对你的信息和信仰有没有实验，或者有没有违心的地方？ So think about this. How does increasing your knowledge impact, good and bad, your faith? 所以如果你提高你知识，在哪里可能有好还是不好的影响？ Sorry, I should rephrase the English because I rephrase a little different in Chinese. The English, it should be, if knowledge is increased, how could that negatively and beneficially influence your faith? Think about that. How could an increased knowledge influence your faith? In a good way or a bad way. And when I say knowledge, I'm talking about just from the Bible. 然后我今天晚上说知识，就是关于圣经，不是另外一个知识。对你信仰有什么好处，有什么不好处？ And I've been thinking, how could the Bible have a negative influence on my faith? 你也可能想起来，牧师你啥意思？圣经怎么对我的信仰有不好的影响？ That's a good question. 很好的问题。 We'll answer that as we go. 很好的问题，我们马上回复这个问题。Verse 4, 第4节。For verily, when we were with you, we told you before that we should suffer tribulation, even as it came to pass, and ye know. 我们在你们的哪里的时候，预先告诉你们，我们必受患难。以后，果然应验了，你们也知道。Do you see where I'm going with this? 你现在发现了我们的问题是什么？ If you have an idea of the Christian life, 如果你现在的基督徒了解是这样子 Now that I'm a Christian, God will bless all areas of my life. God will bless my work, bless my finances, bless my relationships, bless my marriage, bless this and that. 如果你现在对基督徒了解是现在我是基督徒，上帝肯定会祝福我的工作，祝福我的 婚礼，祝福我的结婚，祝福我的车，祝福我的钱，祝福我的关系，什么什么什么的。你现在发现你有什么问题？ Because what did Paul just say? 所以因为保罗刚刚说什么？ So here Paul is talking to this church. Actually, he's writing a letter to them. 然后保罗现在在写信给这个教会。This is what we told you before. 所以他说，我们之前已经告诉你，又要告诉你们。What? We should suffer tribulation. 我们必受患难。我们必受患难。It's interesting because in the English, I mean, right here, I don't have the Greek in front of me, but here I have the English or the Chinese and the English. 然后我现在没有在我的 iPad 没有希腊文，但是这里我有英文、中文。And the way they translated the English and the way they translated the Chinese is a little different. 然后他们反过来英文、中文有点不一样的。In English, it says we should suffer tribulation. 英文说是我们应该受患难。But in Chinese, it's literally translated as we must suffer tribulation. 但是中文是我们必受患难，有点不一样的，对吧？ Either way, the point is, Paul's saying tribulation is going to come. And as a matter of fact, we already warned you about that. 然后保罗现在说，你知道吗？我们基督徒会受到什么患难？对，我们这今天已经经过了你们。And this is something that Paul was very familiar with. 然后保罗他特别熟悉患难，他特别熟悉患难、痛苦。Paul was very, very familiar with tribulations, with trials, with difficulties, and suffering. And yet, in our church, we have since the first year, this is the third year is almost finished. You know, in like a week, we'll be 3 years old. Or about a week and a half, we'll be 3 years old. 一周 like 10天大概，我们就成为3岁，我们教会是3岁。You know, since the first year till now, there has always been, every single year, people bring up this same issue. 从第一年到现在，我们参加的弟兄姐妹们会问我这个问题。And actually, it's not asking me. It's quite well. It kind of is because it's a series, a flurry of questions. I should say. 因为就是不是一个问题，其实是挺多的。And it's usually like, why am I going through all this? And why is God not either answering my prayers, or why is God not giving me what I want, or why is it not going this, and this way when I thought it should be? 然后就是为什么上帝没有回复我祷告请求，或者为什么上帝不在乎我，或者为什么我之前了解基督徒生活应该是这样子，但是现在是那样子，然后那样子是更恐怖的，为什么？ And there have been a few brothers and sisters in this church that have actually asked these questions over and over and over, and their hearts get more and more hard. 然后他们有几个弟兄姊妹，他们继续问我这个问题，然后以后他们心越来越硬的，更硬的。Because and part of the issue is because they probably just don't understand that as Christians we will suffer tribulations, we will encounter difficulties. It's going to happen. Unless like you become a Christian the next day you die. If something like that happens, then I understand. 然后你知道吗？我们都会发生了什么？从第一天到现在，肯定遇到很多困难，很多患难。但是为什么从第一天到现在，还有弟兄姐妹们，他们说他们遇到那么多困难的问题，但是他们现在差不多要离开神，因为他们觉得没好用，或者无所谓。为什么？ And so why since day one till now, are there still some Christians struggling with this? And yet Paul says right here, 然后保罗这里说什么？ He says, "For verily, when we were with you," 他说我们在你们哪里的时候。So he says, "When we were there, we told you, we warned you." 他说我们在哪里？我们已经告诉你，警告你们 that we will suffer difficulties. 我们肯定遇到问题，困难，痛苦。And then he's writing later on says, and you know what? We will suffer tribulation. 我们必受患难。And it says, and then it came to pass. And then he says, what we warned you about happened. 然后他说，我们警告你，已经遇到了。So if you are a Christian and you're thinking, why is all this evil happening to me? The reality shouldn't be, why is all this evil happening to you? What you should be saying is, Lord, thank you for allowing all this difficulty me to go through, encounter all these difficulties. Because it is not wasted. It won't be wasted. And it's not in vain. It's not like God's just taking me through all of this just so you can be ha 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 ha. I like stepping on you and kicking you in the face. No, it's actually because God wants you to have your best life in heaven. 所以你知道吗？如果你现在感觉为什么上帝带领我们，我遇到那么多坑，我还在坑里，或者遇到这么多困难，这么多困难，是不是因为上帝想提你的脸，或者你摔倒的时候他继续提你，觉得哈哈哈？不是，是因为你到天的时候可以有更好的生活。And one of the things that God did in Paul's life, or Jesus did in Paul's life, and he probably is doing in your life right now, if not, he will this year, is that Christ will use trials to increase your faith. 然后你知道吗？耶稣对保罗，也可能是对你现在，或者不是现在，那肯定是今年，给你很多实验，是为了提高你的信仰。So one of the ways, get this, so let's go back to the first one. Increasing knowledge will test your faith. How is that true? 所以第一个，挣扎只是试验你的信息，怎么可能？ How is that possible? How can increasing your knowledge test your faith? 那如果你提高你知识，这么对你的信息实验吗？ The more you read the Bible, yes, it's great for you. It's good, and you need it. It's food for you. But it's also a little dangerous. Why? 你知道吗？你现在读很多圣经，提高你的神学的水平，对，是对你的属灵的吃饭，也是对你非常好，是必须的。但是你知道吗？也是对你有点危险。Because if you came into Christianity and you have expectations that are up here, and you're thinking God is going to bless me, do this, that, and give me this and that, and God's going to hear my prayer requests, and when I pray for like a boyfriend or I pray for a girlfriend, God can give it to me next week. If that was your expectations when coming into as a Christian, and you start to read, you're thinking, why is Paul right here talking about suffering and tribulations? I don't want tribulations. I want my best life now. And you're going to think, why is this true? 然后你知道吗？如果你开始信靠耶稣的时候，你都了解，那我现在是基督徒，我要开始为上帝，请你安排一个美女给我。上帝，我没有男友，请你提高一个帅哥好吗？但是你发现在这里保罗说什么？他说必受患难。哦，我不要，我只想要现在是最好的生活而已。I only want to have my best life now. I don't want suffering. I don't want tribulations. And yet, did you know? 但是你知道吗？ The Bible promises you, 圣经答应你 that you will go through trials and tribulations and difficulties. 你知道吗？圣经答应你，你这边会遇到试验、试探、困难、患难，这是必须的。This is a must. And it isn't for nothing. 然后不是为了没有意思，都有意思。But yes, and yes, I also do need to say that God does give us a lot of our answers to prayers. Things that we want, God will does give to his children a lot of what they ask for, they desire in prayer. 但是我也应该说，上帝也会回复很多祷告请求，你的想要他也会提供你。But no pastor should ever say, whatever you want, ask in prayer, and God will give it to you no matter what. Because that's just not true. That's just not true. And some of the things we think, but Pastor, I've asked this for such a long time. Such a long time. And it's a good thing. Why has God not given it to me? And so I feel like, why is God picking on me? And like, well, my pastor told me, or the person who led me to Christ said that, if I want to find a husband, I should become a Christian. I don't know if someone said that to you, but if they did, sorry, because it really doesn't work that way. Yeah, God might give you a husband, but there's, I know some of you guys laugh, but you know what? I've heard people say this very thing. It sounds crazy, but it happens. And people use that as part of an evangelism thing. And here Paul says, we warned you before, and you already know, we already encountered it, that we will suffer tribulations. 然后我不知道没有人对你给你传福音说，嘿，如果你成为基督徒，上帝可以帮你找到帅哥，以后可以跟他结婚。如果他这样的对你说，我知道几个人跟他小了，但是你知道吗？我听过这个问题，然后 A 也听过。所以就是如果有人在传福音，然后你这样的听他们的福音，不好意思，不是这样子。对，你可能以后成为基督徒，上帝准备一个基督徒帅哥或者美女给你，这个可能。但是我们不能说他会，肯定会，因为你不知道，我也不知道。然后保罗这里说什么？必受患难，必受患难。And Paul says here that we will encounter. So, increasing your knowledge, that is Bible knowledge, it will test your faith. 所以增加知识，就是圣经的知识，会试验你的信心。Why? 为什么？ Because the more you read out the Bible, the more you come to understand. And the more you come to understand about Jesus, about God, about the church, about the Christian life, you will realize that the Christian life is, you will encounter, especially if you're a Christian for a long time, you will encounter many, 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 many difficulties. Many difficulties. And if you have expectations here, but the reality is here, just be prepared to adjust your expectations if it needs to be adjusted. 所以如果你读了很多圣经，然后你发现，嘿，我最近觉得我们基督徒是这样子，你的要求是这么高，但是你读很多圣经，你发现了，哎，不同的基督徒的生活是这么低，那你需要改变你的 expectations。 Because the reality is that when it comes to Christianity, we're pretty much all the same. There is no special Christian. 所以跟你说实话，我们基督徒差不多都是一样的，没有特别的基督徒，没有超人的基督徒，我们都差不多一样的。Yes, it's longer than your arm. 对，比你的手更长。And so this is the reality. 然后就是真实的。So increasing your knowledge, that is Bible knowledge, will test your faith. And God's going to look at it and say, okay, now you have this much revelation of who I am. How are you going to respond to that? 然后呢，如果增加知识会试验你的信息，上帝会对你说，现在你有这么多的我的神学，那对你生活有什么改变？有什么影响？ Number 2, 第二个 temptation will test your faith. 诱惑会试验你的信仰。 Verse 5, 第5节 For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you, and our labor be in vain. 为此 我既不能载人，就打发人去。要晓得你们的信心如何，恐怕那诱惑人的道地诱惑了你们，叫我们的劳苦归于土人。Right away， 现在 Who is the tempter here？ 这里的诱惑人是谁？ Well, you should probably all know. 你应该都知道 It's Satan, right? 撒旦，对吧？ Did you know? 你知道吗？ It is 2022. 是2022年。Satan doesn't need to be present right now in the church to tempt you. Satan 不需要是现在这个教会为了诱惑你。There are so many temptations. There are temptations over your phone. The cats are temptations. I was kidding. And there's temptations all over. 你知道吗？这里有很多诱惑，就比如你的手机有时候诱惑，你拍那个两只猫也是你的诱惑，我不知道。AG, I'm just kidding. So think about this. So 你考虑 How is a temptation a test to your faith? 那诱惑对你的信仰有什么实验？And if a temptation comes into your life, can it be for good? Or is it always evil? 那如果你现在你的生活遇到实验，而遇到诱惑，有没有好处？或者老师是不好的？ Think about that. 你想一想。Verse 5, 第5节 For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith. So what's going on here? 所以这里有什么问题？为此，我既不能载人，就打发人去。你们晓得什么是信心如何 Lest to know your faith. So here, Paul is anxious about something. 所以现在保罗他有点担心，他有点惊讶。Why? 为什么？ Because he wants to know, hey, how's your guys' faith? I left you. I want to have an update status. How are you guys? Are you guys okay? Are you increasing in your faith, in your knowledge of the Bible? 你现在的信仰是怎么样的？你们现在是干嘛？你现在的信仰是高一点吗？提高吗？还是退步一点？ And Paul wants to know so bad because he's worried. Why? He's worried that Satan would come along and tempt these young Christians and lead them into sin. 所以保罗现在有点担心，他担心什么？撒旦过来这个教会，诱惑这个小羊，领到他们进入坑里。And then he says something very scary at the end. 然后在那个最后的从句 in the last clause, he says, why? He's worried about all of this. Why? Because he's afraid that something is going to happen. What is that? That all the work that he did, that Timothy did, that Silvanus did would be in vain. That's why he's afraid. 所以他现在在害怕什么？他说我们什么？谁？我们是谁？提摩太、希勒、保罗，他们担心什么？叫我们的劳苦归于土壤。He's afraid that Satan would come along, tempt these Christians, and lead them to leave the church. And then all that work would have been wasted. That's what Paul's getting at here. 然后保罗怕什么？撒旦来诱惑这个教会，令到这么多的小羊离开教会。以后他觉得，我们这么努力工作，都是浪费的。That's what he's worried about. He's worried that people who profess to be Christians, when something difficult came in life, they turn their backs on Christ. They leave the faith. 所以保罗现在是害怕什么？他害怕给别人传福音，他们开始信靠耶稣，或者他们说我们开始信靠耶稣，但是很大的困难，他们遇到很大的患难，就离开教会。When they encounter the temptation, when they counter the tribulation, they end up leaving the church. Because it wasn't, they're like, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't become a Christian so that God would shut down my business. I didn't become a Christian and only to find out that my husband says, I'm not going to be married to a Christian, takes off. This isn't what I signed up for. And this is what Paul is afraid of. 所以保罗现在是害怕什么？有基督徒说，我成为基督徒意思是为了上帝祝福我，不是为了以后让我的公司变坏了，或者吃了这么多亏，或者我成为基督徒，为什么我老公跟我说我不想跟基督徒结婚，我走了。你说我成为基督徒不是为了这个问题，我成为基督徒因为应该上帝要祝福我。And Paul is saying here that this is what he's worried about. 所以现在保罗是很担心这个问题。Because he knows that this church had a lot of people who just became Christians. 因为他知道这个教会刚刚有这么多刚刚开始信靠耶稣的人。And he had to leave. 然后他需要离开。And now he's worried. 他现在很担心。You know, what about Brother Lee, who just became a Christian? And I'm hearing about how his wife says, no way am I going to be married to a Christian guy. I'm out of here. Or he finds out the wife's sleeping around with other men. 然后你听到丽弟说，他刚刚成为基督徒，发现他的老婆跟别的男生一起上床。哪个例子？然后他发现了他老婆对他说：“你成为基督徒，我不想要，我们离婚吧。”然后他走了。And Paul said, just in the verse before, 然后那个上面的经文，保罗说了 ，We warned you， 他说我们已经警告了你 ，that as Christians, we will encounter trials, we will encounter tribulations， 我们基督徒必受患难。And then he says, and when they came, we told you， 他说我们遇到患难，我们已经告诉你。And Paul's like, look at our lives. 然后保罗说，你们看我们的生活。Look at Paul, look at Timothy, look at Silvanus, look at the lives. 你看这个弟兄们，保罗、提摩太、希勒。We encountered tribulations, and now he's worried about the church, the small Christians, the ones that might have had expectations up here when the Christian reality is here. 然后他现在很担心，这样的基督徒的要求是这么高，但是我们基督徒生活是平常是在这里，不是在哪里。And as a Christian, there are some Christians, when they encounter something very, very difficult, that they will leave the church temporarily. This is true. This is true. They'll come back. If they're a real Christian, they will come back. But there are some Christians that actually leave the church for a temporary amount of time. And you know what? As a Christian, leaving the church, even if it's only for a short amount of time, that is the most dangerous thing you can do to yourself spiritually. 你知道吗？有一些基督徒，他们真的是基督徒，他们会离开教会，但是是短时间。因为如果你是崇尚基督徒，圣灵会带领你回去100%。但是如果你是这样的基督徒，你离开教会是比较短时间，你知道吗？就是对你的属灵、你的灵魂的生活是最危险的方法。Because when you are out there and you're out from under biblical preaching, you're out from the church, you're out from brothers and sisters in fellowship, then you're on your own. And you're like a little fly flying around and Satan's like squish with his temptations and his deceptions. And that's what he does best. 你一个人在外面没有长大的保护，没有教会的保护，没有团契的保护，没有弟兄姐妹的保护。那如果只是你是基督徒在外面是一个人，对你现在是最危险的，因为你是对撒旦是一个小小的虫子，他可以把他说 squish， 你现在会死了。 给你很多诱惑，让你摔倒。As Christians, we need the church. We need the leadership in the church. We need our brothers and sisters in the church. We need small groups. We need it. Why? Because none of us are strong on our own. None of us. And you say, well, I have Jesus. I have Jesus, That's true. But Jesus often reveals himself and his grace and his mercy through the church. He can do it in your life, yes. But he also gives special grace and special mercy when you're in the church. Why? Because one thing, you're under preaching. How many times have you sat on preaching and you've been convicted about something and you're like, well, I knew this is true and you knew what you're doing is wrong. But yet, the longer you're out from the church, the longer you're out from under preaching, you're thinking, well, it's not that bad of a sin. And then you start to, in your mind, you think, yeah, it's not this bad, and you start to take this and you bring it down. You bring it down, and you're thinking, and you're like, it's not really that bad. And before you know it, it's not even an issue anymore. And then when you go to church, and for whatever reason, the pastor says something, and it's just like taking a sledgehammer, boom, to your head, and just knocks you over. Why? It's not the pastor, it's the Spirit of God. And yes, the Holy Spirit could do that to you on your own. But God, it says, Paul says that God uses the foolishness of preaching to save some. So there's a special grace, a special anointing on preaching that God uses to stir up people's hearts that he doesn't use anywhere else. And I don't know why, that's just the way God has ordained it. 你知道吗？我们基督徒，如果你很长的时间不在教会，不去团契，不听牧师讲道什么的，你会发现你对你的罪会慢慢改变，你和你的罪的关系，然后以后之前你觉得这个罪是很大的问题，但是以后你发现，这个罪对我的生活没有那么大的问题，以后你也觉得不是罪，然后你突然听牧师的讲道，然后你真的感觉生命 bam， 然后你感觉非常非常不好，为什么？有什么改变？是因为你听牧师的讲道，让你的感情复活，让你的知识复活。我不知道为什么，但是你知道吗？圣经有一个经文，保罗说了，上帝选择讲道。英文我说 the foolishness of preaching to save some， 上帝选择讲道是为了拯救一些的人。我不知道为什么上帝这样的安排。上帝没有这样的，你读圣经的经文没有这样的经文，或者对团契没有这样的经文，对分享没有这样的经文，对一起吃饭一起分享基督徒生活没有这样的经文，只有对长大的这样的经文，因为就是上帝这样的安排。And so the most dangerous thing a Christian can do is to leave the church, even if it's temporary. 所以你知道对我们基督徒的生活最危险的地方是什么？离开教会，就是离开聚会。Because all of us need to hear preaching. 因为我们都需要听讲道。Why? Because there is a special power, a special anointing that God has unctioned upon preaching. And if you're out of the church, you're like, well, I never, the pastor never said anything, or the person who's evangelized to me never said anything about all these difficulties. I'm out. And you leave. Then you almost have virtually no protection out there, especially if you're by yourself. 然后你说了，牧师或者别人在给我传福音，没有说我成为基督徒会遇到更困难，会遇到更多的试验。我走了，我不想要，我走了。然后你是基督徒，在外面是一个人，是最危险的，真的，因为你脱离你的保护。And so Paul's concern is this very issue. 所以保罗现在他关心什么？关心这个问题。 他特别的关心这个问题。Why? He's afraid that Satan will come and tempt these Christians into sin. 所以保罗现在是特别担心这个问题，会遇到撒旦会过来诱惑这个小羊离开教会。Because once they leave the church, they have almost next to nothing in terms of protection. 因为如果他们离开教会，他们的保护的地方是差不多没有了。Acts 20, 29, and 30. 使徒行传20章29到30节。For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among, not sparing the flock. 我知道我去之后，必有凶暴的豺狼进入你们的中间，不爱惜羊群。Also of our own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things to draw away disciples after them. 就是你们中间也必有人起来说悖谬的话，要引诱门徒跟从他们。So here there's two different areas of danger. 这里有两个不同的危险的地方。Number one is wolves that will come in from outside. 外面的狼要进入教会。Not only that, 还有 there will be people, 有一些人 they look like disciples. 在外面你觉得他们都是门徒。They look like other brothers and sisters. 他们看起来是别的弟兄、别的姐妹。And they get in among the church. 然后他们进入教会。And it turns out, by the way they speak, what they teach, what they do, that they're not disciples of Christ. They're disciples of Satan. 然后呢，看到他们的说法、他们的方法、他们的做法，不是关于耶稣的信徒，是撒旦的信徒。And Paul is talking about these are all different trials and tribulations that come upon the Christian life. 所以就是对我们基督徒的生活，我们都会遇到这样的试探、这样的试验。1 Timothy 4:1, 提摩太前书第4章1节。Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the later times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. 圣灵明说，在后来的时候，必有人离弃正道，听从那引诱人的邪灵和鬼魔的道理。This is so dangerous. 这是特别特别危险。It talks about how in the end times, 就是在我们时代的最后的时间 ，right now, 现在 that some people in the church, 有一些人在教会里面 that they will be tempted by these spirits. And these spirits have one job, that is to tempt these people that claim to be Christians in the church and or maybe some of the Christians and lead them astray. They will seduce them. They will say things. They will do things that they want to see, that they want to hear, that they want to taste. And they will be led out of the church from that. Why? Because once you're out, then the wolves come and devour you. 所以有一些的灵，他们的诱惑的能力超级厉害。他们会来参加聚会，跟弟兄姊妹说很多我们天天话。你想听什么？你想看什么？摸什么？他们都会给你。为了什么？为了让你离开教会。离开教会，因为你离开教会，没有东西能保护你。离开教会，狼就过来吃完你，吃死了你。That is exactly what Paul's afraid. 就是保罗现在是他最危险的地方，他最怕的地方。He says, For this cause, when I could no longer forbear, I sent to know your faith, lest by some means the tempter have tempted you and our labor be in vain. And this is what he's worried about. He's worried about Christians leaving the church. Satan would come along, tempt them, influence them, say whatever, and they leave the faith. They leave the church. 所以保罗现在是最怕，他最害怕的地方是什么？我自我不能载人，就打发人去，要晓得你们的信心如何，恐怕那诱惑人得到地诱惑了你们，叫你们劳苦归于土人，离开教会。撒旦会过来诱惑他们离开教会。And the Bible warns that this is going to happen. 然后圣经警告我们，教会会遇到这个问题，会遇到这个问题。You know, just over the weekend, 上个周末，someone shared something with me. 有一个弟兄姊妹跟我分享一件事 ，and they said that there was another sister that had a Muslim pray for her to heal her. 有一个弟兄姊妹跟我分享，有这样的姊妹，让一个穆斯林为她祷告。And this sister said to the other sister, 然后这个姊妹对这个另外一个姊妹说了 ，Why can't you just pray to God to heal you? Why do you need to go to a Muslim to pray for you? And the sister's response was, I don't want to talk about it. Could this be exactly what Paul's talking about? 然后这个姊妹说了，这个姊妹问这个姊妹，就是这个姊妹问那个穆斯林为这个姊妹祷告，他问他为什么需要一个穆斯林为了医治你的身体祷告？为什么不求神医治你的身体吗？这可能是保罗在这里说出来这个问题。He says, now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in later times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. I'm not saying that this sister left the faith, but could it be that there are evil spirits trying to lead her away and using anything else to do so? Because what the one sister asked the other sister says, why can't you just pray to God? Why can't you just pray to Jesus to heal you? That is a legitimate question. And the response was, I don't want to talk about it. That's extremely dangerous. Because you know what that tells me? That tells me that there's something going on in the spirit realm that's influencing that sister. The way that she thinks and her response. It's very, very dangerous and it's very, very real. 你知道吗？这个姊妹问她，另外一个姐妹说了，为什么你不求耶稣医治你身体吗？为什么你去穆斯林为你祷告医治你身体吗？你知道吗？这个问题是挺好的，因为这是真理的。他问到一个很好的问题，不是生气。然后这个姊妹说，我不想告诉你，我不想讨论这个问题。我听这句话，我就想起来，这里肯定有邪恶的灵在影响他，影响他的信仰，影响他的想法。为什么他需要不是基督徒为他祷告？特别的危险，特别的危险。And this is exactly what Paul's afraid of. 然后就是保罗特别的害怕这个问题，特别的害怕。Temptation will tempt your faith. 诱惑会试验你的信仰。Temptation will tempt your faith. 诱惑会试验你的信仰。And those that overcome temptations, 然后如果你诱惑如果你抵制你的诱惑 it will only become your strength. 会成为你的加强。It'll become your strength. 会成为你加强。But if you are tempted and you fall into that, then you will fall into a pit. 如果你摔到，你会在坑里面。Temptations will also test your faith. 诱惑会试验你的信仰。 Let's pray. We'll continue this next week. 我们祷告，下周就继续。Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening. 天父，我们很感谢你今天晚上的聚会。And Lord, let's pray for our church. 然后主，我为我们的教会祷告。I pray especially for every single brother and sister. 然后我为我们所有的弟兄姐妹们祷告。Lord, especially this year as new trials and tribulations and temptations come. 然后特别是这年新的患难、试验、诱惑要来。Lord, help us to overcome them. Help us to pass through and to not fall in. 然后主啊，帮我们超过或者脱离或者过去我们所有的困难、我们的诱惑、我们的患难。And Lord, help it to all to further strengthen our faith. 然后帮我们所有的诱惑、患难、试验会帮我们提高我们的信仰。And Lord, just pray for your continual guidance and blessing, and also help us with figuring out this new location. 然后主要也帮我们找到新的场地。And Lord, just pray for just your blessing, and we love you. 然后主要我们也为我们教会祷告，求你祝福我们，我们爱你，我奉你耶稣基督的名求，阿们。